Good morning, my friends. Grim here. I hope you're all doing very well today. Welcome to my review of The Witcher 1, Enhanced Edition, a game that is 14 years old, and thus ancient by gaming standards, but also a game that was the jumping off point for one of the most widely popular, long-lasting, beloved trilogies in the history of gaming. We're going to talk about the pros and cons, my experiences playing it blind for the first time ever in 2021, and when I say blind, I do mean fully blind, no experience with any of the games in the series before this, no experience with the books or the Netflix series for that matter, so we are taking The Witcher 1 as it is. Thank you very much for watching. Let's talk about this game. Thank you as well to all Patreon supporters. Love you guys. Thank you so much. A few numbers for you to start things off that help put my experience into context here, my friends. It took me about 3 months to finish this game, and that doesn't mean that there's an enormous amount of content you spend endless hundreds upon hundreds of hours delving into. No, my Steam game time, the official log, is actually 34 hours. Not terribly long by the standards of RPGs, I dare say. And what that means, well, you do the math. 34 hours spread over 3 months. What that means is that I did not feel myself compelled to play the game for large amounts of time at any one sitting, nor with any particular frequency, and that in itself has got to be a bit of a strike against the game, because of course a game that truly knocks it out of the park for you has got you coming back at every available moment. Now, I'm a very busy guy, that factors in here as well, no doubt about it. My free time is quite limited, but on the other hand, as you can see by the frequency of my Skyrim uploads lately, that game has got me playing it whenever I can, right? And The Witcher 1 just didn't do that for me, so strike one. But is that such a bad thing, my friends? I dare say not. Some games are meant to be sipped on, if you will, rather than binged, and perhaps The Witcher 1 is one of those. And leading from that point, I think two factors could play into that assessment of this game. The first one is the atmosphere, and the atmosphere of the game is a major pro. We're talking about a game that actually holds up okay. It's certainly nothing special by 2021 standards, but considering that it was made 14 years ago, it's really decent graphically. And I stress decent, not really modern standards, but for its time, definitely very good. But the atmosphere goes so much beyond the graphical depictions. The music, my friends, the soundtrack, top tier, top notch, absolute 10 out of 10 soundtrack, huge fan of it, really carried the game for me in many ways, and beyond that, it's a dark, brooding atmosphere. The sensations that type of atmosphere engenders, I did feel, again, despite how dated the game is, I did feel some level of immersion, some level of trepidation at times, some level of thrill in this kind of dark, brooding atmosphere that also strikes me as executing the Central and Eastern European-based themes upon which it is constructed to a pretty nice level. And that actually plays into the previous point. One is not necessarily eager to leave this atmosphere behind so quickly, and that's part of maybe why I felt not compelled necessarily, but I found myself playing the game more slowly, playing the game in a more piecemeal manner, rather than rushing through it in a haste to be done. But the other thing that plays into this, which is more of a con, is the fact that it is a bit dated, not only graphically, but also in other ways. And those types of issues with clunk, or just generally being a little bit regressive relative to what we're used to as far as modern games go, yeah, maybe small doses, those things are more tolerable. That's also perhaps why I found myself taking 3 months to play 34 hours worth of this game. Now, when we start talking about mechanics, inevitably, combat is what comes to mind. Combat in Witcher 1, I would say most people either love it or hate it. My own experience was one of total befuddlement for the first 5 minutes, to the point where I almost wondered, can I even play this game? Is this game even playable? What in the name of God is wrong with this combat system? And then I kind of got it, or so I thought, but it actually took me longer still to really start to appreciate the combat, because at first, again, that 5 minutes was just entering a totally alien world, and then there were probably a couple hours worth of gameplay after that where I thought I kind of got it, but over time more nuances emerged. And again, I'm playing blind, I'm not referring to guides or walkthroughs unless absolutely necessary to get past a point where I'm stuck, right? So keep that all in mind. Having said all of that, the combat is dated, the combat is not for everybody, but the combat really grew on me. By maybe the end of Act 1, so maybe about 1/5 or so of the way through the game, 1/4, something like that, I was actually digging the combat, and it is repetitive, and it is formulaic, but I really didn't mind that. In context of everything else, I actually think the combat works pretty well. Now on to the story, and some people have told me that the story is really what carries the game. I understand that, and I found the story pretty interesting overall, but for me, the atmosphere is more what carried the game. The story, perhaps the strong second in that regard. Combat, again, I liked it, I warmed up to it, but nobody would realistically say that the combat is the main reason you'd play The Witcher 1. If you disagree, of course, let me know in the comments below. But back to the story, I thought it was pretty good. I thought it was relatively compelling. It did feel a little bit slapped together in places. The character Alvin comes to mind, where at no point was I ever exactly sure, beyond a general vague sense of this is the chosen one, and he may grow to be a threat or a savior, and maybe your influence can help dictate that one way or the other. But certain things like that felt out of place. The story as a whole was pretty cool. There were some good points, some good twists. Overall, I felt invested. But of course, a lot of it is relatively ham-fisted as well, especially some of the social commentary. And that is partially, I'm sure, a consequence of the translation. And we'll get to that in a little bit, but notoriously, the Polish to English translation was a bit hit or miss, let's just put it that way. But overall, the story, yeah, I thought there were enough interesting, unique elements to keep me engaged, and the stakes were high enough. There was an element of realism in the fantasy context. Maybe what I mean to say there is that I was able to suspend my disbelief relatively well. And yeah, I mean, overall, you can't ask for too much more than that. Now, speaking of the Polish to English translation and the dialogue as a whole, I have such mixed feelings about it, because to the extent that the storyline suffered, or the immersion, the suspension of disbelief suffered, in addition to being a function of dated graphics and dated mechanics, it was also a function of very strange, goofy, just kind of uncanny dialogue, where you're not exactly sure whether it's meant to be humorous or whether it is unintentionally humorous due to certain ideas or concepts or just words being lost in translation. That said, there are other aspects or elements of the dialogue, instances that made me laugh out loud. This isn't necessarily one of them. This, what I'm showing you here on this screen cap, is something that kind of just sums up the dialogue as a whole, where, some of the themes that are repeatedly explored, yeah, they're a little bit of a problem, let's just put it that way, and sometimes the dialogue is delivered in a way that is very clearly written by somebody with English as their second language. On top of that, the voice acting for the English version is not the greatest, especially doesn't suit the dialogue, and when you combine it all together, there are some moments that are laugh out loud funny. And I mean that. I literally found myself laughing out loud. And I think it's about 50-50 in those cases whether that was the intent of the game developers and the writers or not. But overall, the dialogue is a very unique aspect of The Witcher 1. You know, there's a learning curve for these types of things, and let's just leave it there. Now, not to belabor the point, but I actually think this wiki page on Grandma, Shani's grandma to be exact, who is a homeowner in Vizima, is just emblematic of all of the good, bad, and ugly about the dialogue, about the character development, even for minor characters in a game like this. So, just a few fun facts about Shani's grandma. Her diary reveals that she has had at least 5 sexual encounters in her younger days, and she kind of serves as a guardian for Shani, with whom you need to speak to advance the plot at one point, and she just doesn't let you past her. You go into her house, Grandma's there waiting for you, Shani's upstairs, and if you show up drunk, she doesn't like that, but if you sweet talk her, you can lie to her, tell her you're from the hospital, she thinks you're a doctor. You can lose your patience and yell, "Die, hag," and she will die, presumably from a heart attack. You can talk to her, you can reassure her that Geralt's infertile and thus will not have impregnated Shani. You can bribe her with alcohol or with gold women's gloves or just with gold itself. Or you can give her your credentials by showing her the signet ring, and then sometimes randomly at night, Grandma will be in a good mood and will greet you with warmth and will let you in. So Grandma, a very rambunctious old lady, a very feisty opponent, and this is just an example of Witcher 1. If you find this type of thing charming, that is awesome, and it's actually kind of risk-taking in a way, in the sheer variety of ways in which they push the envelope in these little ways, making the characters unique, making them a little risque, etc., but equally likely that you might find it frustrating, especially if you haven't consulted a wiki and don't really want to play by looking at guides. It's like, why won't this old lady let me go? Something else, my friends, that is incumbent upon me to mention are the bugs, and again, sticking with the theme of goofy dialogue moments, here we see a screen cap of Geralt having a conversation about herbs with somebody while a hostile drowner lurks just behind him ready to snap his neck. But of course, the drowner, also very civilized, patiently waiting for the conversation to come to an end before hostilities are resumed. And this type of little bug, the game is frankly rife with them, and it just makes you smile. It's not that big a deal. And again, we're dealing with a game from 2007. So on the one hand, we have to understand that in context these things were unavoidable, but if we're gamers in 2021, I'm trying to give you the authentic review, right? And these bugs can lessen your enjoyment, can reduce immersion, etc. A bug like this, not that big a deal, but I did encounter 1 or 2 major bugs where, it's not like I made an irrevocably bad decision with dialogue or with quest options, or I did anything wrong, or I was using mods or cheat codes or anything like that. I simply just encountered a bug that I was unable to progress it due to the bug without loading an older save, and in one case at least a much older save. So just be warned, bring your bug spray, expect nothing less from this game. It's gonna happen if you pick it up, most likely. The final aspect of The Witcher 1 that I'd like to review, my friends, is itemization, by which I mean your inventory, your equipment, your potions, the whole alchemy system, and I guess we'll talk about leveling here as well. I found this to be a bit of a mixed bag. So on the one hand, the ease and frequency with which you upgrade your gear is not sufficient for me. I love Diablo. I love Skyrim. I love these types of games where you pick up items all the time in here. You've got a big inventory, and you can sell them, and you can craft them, and you can upgrade and change your gear constantly. That aspect of looting, specifically using the weapons and armor that you loot, is 100% a big part of the appeal of RPGs for me. This game doesn't really have that. Now, you can buy a new set of armor, you can find unique swords, you can craft them, but most of the loot you find is not upgrading your gear anywhere near often enough for my own tastes. The alchemy thing I have mixed feelings about, because on the one hand, I didn't really want to learn it in the first place once I found myself eventually over time giving in and deciding to learn a little bit of alchemy and practice a little bit of alchemy. It was actually a pretty good system. It was actually pretty cool, I think elegant, well-designed, and unique, especially at the time. Unique for a game like this. On the other hand, despite warming to that system, I didn't find myself that much more interested in it. I didn't find myself really wanting to be an alchemist. It was kind of a needs-must thing where I was like, okay, we need this potion for this thing, I'll meditate and I'll make it. Now that leads me into meditation and leveling more specifically. That whole aspect of the game, again, it's okay. I actually liked the skill tree a lot. I liked the way you use certain talents to unlock other aspects of the tree, and I did like the level of customization to a degree. That said, could it be more customizable? Absolutely. But I don't mind that so much because you're not playing a custom character, you're playing Geralt of Rivia. Having a little bit more limited customization was okay with me, even though I personally prefer more. Also, without looking at guides, without looking at a walkthrough, without knowing anything about the game beforehand, I found it pretty obvious which ones to level, like which skills to invest in, etc. That didn't seem like too much of a stumbling block, which again is a good thing and a bad thing at the same time. I did find the item storage thing a little bit inconvenient in places. Sometimes, especially near the end of the game, you'll inexplicably not have access to an inventory for a long time. If you don't know that's coming, you won't be able to loot anything if you have a full inventory without dropping stuff, and maybe that doesn't matter because the game's almost over anyway, but little quality of life stuff like that lacking at times. But overall, itemization, my biggest complaint, is not enough good loot, not enough interesting loot. Otherwise, for a 2007 game, and even in the context of today, it's actually pretty decent, all in all. Alright, my friends, so that basically covers everything I wish to cover in this review of The Witcher 1 in 2021, being blind played by yours truly. And it's actually really funny, because in between last scene and this one, as I took a moment to catch my breath, The Witcher 2, Assassin of Kings, something like that, whatever it's called, Kings, Assassins, I don't know. The Witcher 2 just finished downloading, so that's right, I'm going to be playing The Witcher 2 off-camera, piecemeal, just like I did The Witcher 1. I'll come to you with a review about that as well, and then, my friends, my plan is to play The Witcher 3 on camera, right here on this channel, in 1 to 2 hour segments, just like I do with Skyrim, and that will be a blind play as well. So we're going to complete the trilogy. The third part will be here on camera for your viewing pleasure. And just to wrap up my review here of The Witcher 1, I'm going to give it a 6.5 out of 10. The atmosphere, especially the soundtrack, was very strong. The story was decent. Itemization, the looting was lacking. The customability of gear was lacking. Beyond that, skill tree stuff was pretty good. Alchemy was good, perhaps very good if you're more into it than I was. And I actually found myself liking combat a fair amount, which I know will be a controversial opinion, or at least one not shared by a whole lot of people. Beyond that, I found the dialogue to be very erratic, very all over the place. The storylines, moralizing to be a little bit heavy-handed, and a little bit generic in places, and also, of course, the game itself a little bit dated, a little bit buggy, right? All in all, though, I can recommend this even in 2021, even to somebody with no prior investment in the series. However, it wouldn't be at the top of my list of things to play, so here, my friends, is where you come in if you'd like to ask me a clarifying question, if you'd like to counter-signal one of my takes, if you'd like to give me a different perspective. All of that and more is what the comment section is for, so thank you for tuning in. Let me know what you thought of The Witcher 1, and I'll talk to you there. Until then, my friends, have a good one, and I'll see you soon.